Owner returns after 10 years in disguise. What he overhears in break room leaves him speechless. The security badge beeped green, and Victor Langley felt like he was walking into his own funeral. 10 years. 10 years since he'd last stepped foot in Langley Industries, the tech company he built from nothing in his garage 30 years ago. Back then, it was just him, a dream, and a revolutionary idea for cloud storage that would change how businesses operated forever. Now, as he shuffled through the sleek glass lobby disguised as Vincent Lake, a 67-year-old IT technician with gray hair, thick glasses, and a slight limp, he barely recognized the place that had once been his life's work. The lobby alone told a story he didn't want to hear. Gone were the comfortable couches where employees used to gather for impromptu brainstorming sessions. Gone were the inspirational quotes he'd personally selected and mounted on the walls. Quotes about innovation, community, and changing the world. In their place stood cold marble surfaces, corporate awards in locked glass cases, and a massive digital display cycling through stock prices and quarterly projections. "Welcome to Langley Industries," chirped a receptionist who couldn't have been older than 22. "Are you here for the IT orientation?" Victor nodded, adjusting the fake glasses that kept sliding down his nose. The prosthetic padding around his midsection made him feel like a stuffed scarecrow, but it was necessary. Matthew Crane and the other executives who might recognize him had to believe Victor Langley was still living quietly in his Montana cabin, tending to his health after the heart attack that had forced his early retirement. But that heart attack, the one that had nearly finished him and convinced him to step away, had also been a wake-up call. Not just about his mortality, but about what he'd been hearing through industry whispers and worried phone calls from former employees. Massive layoffs. Plummeting employee satisfaction. Stock manipulation rumors. And Matthew Crane, his once trusted protege, at the center of it all. The orientation was held in Conference Room B, a sterile space that used to be the Innovation Lab, where Victor had encouraged wild ideas and calculated risks. Now it housed 12 folding chairs and a PowerPoint presentation about operational efficiency and maximizing shareholder value. The words felt like ice water in his veins. "Welcome, new IT support staff," announced Janet Rodriguez, the HR director Victor remembered hiring 15 years ago. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. "Langley Industries is committed to maintaining our position as a market leader through strategic cost management and streamlined operations." Strategic cost management. Victor's jaw clenched. He built this company on the principle that innovation came from investing in people, not cutting them loose the moment quarterly numbers dipped. As Janet droned on about productivity metrics and performance evaluations, Victor studied his fellow new hires. There was Marcus, a young black man fresh out of college whose enthusiasm reminded Victor of his younger self. Sarah, a single mother in her 40s who'd been laid off from 3 tech companies in the past 5 years. And Tom, a grizzled veteran programmer whose hands shook slightly, probably from too much coffee and too little sleep. These were good people. The kind of people Victor had always believed were the backbone of any successful company. Yet here they were, being lectured about maintaining competitive advantages and meeting elevated performance standards, as if they were potential problems to be managed rather than assets to be valued. During the lunch break, Victor wandered the halls that had once felt like a second home. The engineering floor, where he used to spend hours discussing breakthrough technologies with his team, now buzzed with a different energy entirely. Heads down, focused on screens, minimal conversation. Gone were the whiteboards covered in collaborative equations and half-formed ideas. Instead, each cubicle displayed identical motivational posters about excellence and results. He stopped at what used to be the company museum, a small corner where they displayed early prototypes, patents, and photos from the company's founding days. The space now housed a coffee cart and a sign reading, "Fuel station, powered by productivity. You looking for something?" Victor turned to find a young woman in her 30s, wearing a maintenance uniform with Elena embroidered on the pocket. Her question wasn't suspicious, just genuinely helpful. "Just getting my bearings," Victor replied, pleased that his voice sounded appropriately meek. I'm Vincent, new IT support. Elena Rodriguez, facilities. Janet's my aunt, she got me this job a few years back. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Let me guess, you're wondering what happened to all the cool stuff that used to be here. Victor's pulse quickened. There used to be more? Oh man, you should have seen this place 5-6 years ago. There was this whole wall of photos showing the company's history, old computers they'd invented, awards for innovation. My aunt used to bring me here when I was in high school, and it was like a tech museum. Really inspiring, you know? What happened to it all? Elena shrugged, but Victor caught a flash of sadness in her eyes. New management said it was backward-looking and inconsistent with future-focused branding. Bunch of corporate speak, if you asked me. This place used to feel special. Now, she gestured around the sterile hallway. Now it feels like every other office building in downtown Seattle. The rest of Victor's first day passed in a blur of software installations and password resets. But it was during his walk to the parking garage that evening when he truly understood how far his company had fallen. Posted on the employee bulletin board, the same board where he used to personally thank teams for their innovative projects, was a notice about voluntary unpaid overtime opportunities, and a reminder that personal calls during work hours reflect poorly on departmental efficiency ratings. Below that, someone had taped a printout of anonymous Glassdoor reviews, all scathing. Management treats employees like disposable assets. Innovation is dead here. Everything is about cutting costs and pumping stock prices. The founder would be rolling in his grave if he could see what this company has become. Victor's hands trembled as he read that last one. Rolling in his grave. He wasn't finished, but the company he'd poured his soul into apparently was. As he drove his rented Honda Civic back to the modest apartment he'd leased under his false identity, Victor's mind raced with questions that had no easy answers. How had Matthew Crane, a man he mentored and trusted, allowed, or perhaps orchestrated, such a complete transformation? Where had the company's values gone? And most importantly, was there anything left worth saving? The next morning, Victor arrived early and lingered near the executive elevator, hoping to catch a glimpse of Matthew. When the doors opened at 7:45 a.m. sharp, out stepped a man Victor barely recognized. Gone was the earnest young executive who used to stay late discussing the ethical implications of technology. In his place stood someone who looked like he'd been carved from marble and pressed into an expensive suit, polished, cold, and utterly foreign. Matthew strode past without a glance, talking rapidly into a Bluetooth headset about redundancy elimination and margin optimization. Behind him trailed two other executives Victor recognized, Patricia Wells from legal and David Chan from finance. All three moved with the purposeful indifference of people who viewed the bustling office around them as nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet. As Victor watched them disappear into the executive suite, an area that used to have an open-door policy, he felt something harden in his chest. This wasn't just corporate evolution or natural business growth. This was something else entirely. Something that felt deliberate and calculated. He spent the rest of that second day listening. Really listening. To the way employees spoke in hushed tones about upcoming layoffs. To the bitter jokes about leadership vision and corporate synergy. To the resignation in voices of people who'd once been passionate about their work. By the end of his second day as Vincent Lake, Victor Langley had reached a devastating conclusion. The company he'd built hadn't just changed, it had been gutted from the inside out, leaving only a profitable shell where a soul used to be. But he also realized something else. If he was going to save Langley Industries, if there was still something worth saving, he couldn't do it as Victor Langley, the nostalgic founder living in the past. He would have to do it as Vincent Lake, the invisible IT technician that nobody bothered to notice. The ghost in the machine was about to become very real indeed. 3 weeks into his charade as Vincent Lake, Victor had mastered the art of invisibility. IT technicians, he'd discovered, were like modern-day ghosts, essential to keeping everything running, but so unremarkable that people talked around them as if they didn't exist. It was this invisibility that led him to the executive break room on the 32nd floor at 8:47 p.m. on a drizzly Thursday evening. Victor had been making his rounds, performing routine maintenance checks that gave him legitimate access to restricted areas. The executive break room's coffee machine had been flagged for service. Apparently, the expensive Italian espresso maker was producing weak coffee, a crisis of the highest order for caffeine-dependent executives. As he knelt behind the machine with his toolkit spread across the marble counter, Victor heard the distinctive ping of the elevator arriving. Voices echoed down the hallway, familiar voices that made his blood run cold. "Told the board it's a done deal," Matthew Crane was saying as he entered the break room. "Shanghai Meridian Industries is offering $38 billion. The contracts will be signed by Christmas." Victor's screwdriver slipped, clattering against the machine's internal components. He froze, but the three men who'd entered were too absorbed in their conversation to notice the sound. $38 billion. Patricia Wells' voice carried a note of satisfaction. "And our golden parachutes? $50 million each, minimum," came David Chang's reply. "Plus stock options that'll mature before the acquisition announcement goes public. We'll be set for life." Victor's hands trembled as he pretended to adjust a loose wire. Shanghai Meridian Industries, he knew that name. A massive conglomerate known for buying American tech companies, stripping them for patents and intellectual property, then shuttering operations and moving everything overseas. "What about the workforce?" Patricia asked, though her tone suggested the answer was merely an administrative detail. Matthew's laugh was sharp and cold. "What about them? Shanghai's projections show they'll need maybe 15% of current staff. The rest?" A pause, then the sound of ice clinking in a glass. "The rest becomes someone else's problem. Unemployment insurance will cover them for a while." 15%. Victor's mind reeled. That meant laying off over 3,000 people. 3,000 families who would lose their livelihoods so these three could walk away as millionaires. "I have to admit," David said, "when I first suggested this strategy 5 years ago, I wasn't sure we could pull it off. The old man's reputation was still too strong. Victor Langley," Matthew's voice dripped with disdain. "The great visionary. Do you know what he called me during my last performance review before his heart attack? He said I was losing sight of our human mission." "Our human mission?" Another bitter laugh. "As if running a charity was the point of business." Victor's chest tightened, but not from his old heart condition. This was the man he mentored, the person he trusted with his life's work. He really believed all that inspirational nonsense, didn't he? Patricia chimed in. "Innovation for humanity's sake, treating employees like family, building a better world through technology. Pure marketing fluff. The best part," Matthew continued, "is that everyone still thinks he's some kind of business saint. Poor Victor Langley, forced into early retirement by his failing health, watching helplessly as the cruel corporate world moves on without him." The mock sympathy in his voice made Victor's skin crawl. If only they knew what a senile relic he'd become in his final years. Still giving speeches about corporate responsibility and ethical leadership, while hemorrhaging market share to competitors who actually understood how business works. "Speaking of which," David interjected, "the Shanghai executives want assurance that any remaining Langley loyalists will be transitioned out during the acquisition. They're concerned about cultural resistance to operational changes." "Already handled," Matthew replied smoothly. "I've been documenting performance issues with anyone who still quotes the founder's old philosophies. Elena Rodriguez in facilities, Marcus Williams in junior development, that whole group from the original engineering team who still think innovation matters more than profit margins. They'll be in the first wave of layoffs, citing inadequate performance metrics." Victor's vision blurred. Elena, who'd shown him kindness on his first day. Marcus, the young programmer whose enthusiasm reminded him of his younger self. Good people who still believed in the values he'd built this company on, targeted for elimination because their loyalty made them inconvenient. "You know what the beautiful irony is?" Matthew's voice had taken on a philosophical tone, the way it used to when he discussed technology trends. Langley thought he was building something permanent, a legacy. But all he really did was create a valuable asset that smart people could eventually monetize properly. His precious innovation became our intellectual property. His employee loyalty became our stable workforce during the transition. His reputation became our credibility with investors. A perfectly executed long-term strategy. Patricia agreed. Though I doubt the old fool ever imagined his life's work would end up funding our retirements. His life's work? Matthew's laugh was the cruelest sound Victor had ever heard. This company stopped being Victor Langley's the moment he signed those succession documents. Everything after that was just legacy management. Keeping up appearances until we could maximize the exit value. The conversation continued, but Victor couldn't process the words anymore. His hands had gone numb, and the screwdriver felt impossibly heavy. These weren't just business decisions. They were a complete repudiation of everything he believed in, everything he tried to build. As the executives' voices faded down the hallway, leaving behind only the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of expensive coffee, Victor remained crouched behind the machine, his disguise suddenly feeling like a prison. Matthew was right about one thing. Victor Langley, the idealistic founder, was deceased. But Vincent Lake, the invisible IT technician, was very much alive. And unlike Victor, Vincent had nothing left to lose. The question was no longer whether he could save his company. The question was whether he could gather enough evidence to expose the truth before Christmas, before 3,000 innocent people lost everything so 3 guilty ones could profit. Victor slowly packed his tools, his mind already working on a plan that would have terrified his younger, more trusting self. The ghost in the machine was about to become very vengeful indeed. Victor's transformation from observer to investigator began at 2:17 a.m. on a Friday night, alone in the server room with nothing but the blue glow of monitors and the quiet hum of cooling fans for company. His legitimate IT credentials gave him access to systems that Matthew and his conspirators never imagined would be scrutinized. As Vincent Lake, he could run routine maintenance checks on financial databases, perform security audits on executive email servers, and conduct backup verifications on archived documents that supposedly no one cared about anymore. What he found in those first few late-night sessions made his blood boil. Hidden in a subfolder labeled Operational Efficiency Reports were the real financial projections, documents that painted a picture of deliberate sabotage. Matthew's team had been artificially inflating operational costs by routing vendor payments through shell companies they controlled, skimming percentages while making the business appear less profitable than it actually was. Meanwhile, they'd been selling off valuable patents and licensing deals at below-market rates to Shanghai Meridian subsidiaries, essentially gifting intellectual property to their future buyers. The most damning discovery came buried in David Chang's encrypted email archive, a 3-year correspondence with Shanghai Meridian executives, detailing a step-by-step plan to hollow out Langley Industries from within. They'd been planning this acquisition since 2022, systematically weakening the company to justify the eventual fire sale. But gathering digital evidence was only half the battle. Victor needed allies, people who could corroborate what he was finding, witnesses who could testify to the systematic destruction of the company culture he'd built. That's how he found himself befriending Marcus Williams during lunch breaks in the company cafeteria. Marcus was everything Victor had hoped to find: brilliant, passionate, and frustratingly naive about corporate drama. At 26, he reminded Victor of himself 3 decades earlier, full of ideas about how technology could make the world better, convinced that good work would naturally be recognized and rewarded. "You know what really gets me?" Marcus said during one of their conversations, picking at his sandwich while Victor pretended to read a technical manual. "I've got this idea for a carbon tracking application that could help small businesses reduce their environmental footprint. Real game-changing stuff. But every time I try to get 5 minutes with someone in leadership, they tell me to focus on current priorities and measurable deliverables." Victor looked up from his manual. "What kind of current priorities?" "Efficiency optimizations. Cost reduction algorithms. Basically anything that helps squeeze more profit out of existing systems without actually innovating." Marcus's frustration was palpable. Mr. Langley, the founder, he used to encourage this kind of blue sky thinking. At least, that's what the old-timers say. Now it's like they're allergic to any idea that might require real investment. You never met him? The founder? Marcus shook his head. He retired before I started here. Heart problems, I heard. But Elena Rodriguez in facilities worked here back then. She says he used to walk the floors, actually talking to engineers about their projects. Can you imagine? A CEO who cared about the technical details? Through Marcus, Victor was introduced to an underground network of employees who still believed in the company's original mission. There was Elena, of course, who had become an unofficial keeper of company history. Sarah Chin, a customer service representative who'd been documenting how the decline in product quality was affecting client relationships. Tom Anderson, the veteran programmer from Victor's IT orientation, who'd been quietly maintaining code libraries that the current management considered legacy waste. These conversations happened in careful whispers during smoke breaks, in empty conference rooms during lunch hours, in the parking garage after official hours ended. Victor learned that his suspected allies were being systematically marginalized, their project proposals ignored, their performance reviews nitpicked, their contributions minimized in team meetings. It's like they want us to quit, Elena confided during one late evening encounter. Victor had been replacing fluorescent bulbs in the facility's office when she'd returned to grab forgotten paperwork. They're making it so unpleasant that good people just give up and leave. Then they can say the layoffs are about natural attrition and workforce optimization. How long has this been going on? Victor asked, carefully keeping his voice neutral. Started about 3 years ago, right after the last board restructuring. Before that, this place actually felt like family. Mr. Langley used to host these quarterly all-hands meetings where he'd talk about our mission, celebrate innovations from every department, even thank the custodial staff by name. Elena's eyes grew distant. I still remember him saying that a company's true value wasn't in its stock price, but in how many lives it improved. Both employees and customers. Those words hit Victor like a physical blow. He'd forgotten saying that, but Elena's memory brought it flooding back, standing in the old auditorium, looking out at faces that reflected his own excitement about the future they were building together. As the weeks passed, Victor's night shift investigations revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Forged board resolutions authorizing the patent sales. Backdated contracts that retroactively justified executive bonuses tied to operational improvements that were actually asset stripping. But it was during his deepest dive into the company's archives, in a forgotten storage room on the 15th floor, that Victor found something that nearly broke him. Boxes and boxes of old photographs, company newsletters, and employee recognition awards from the company's golden age. Pictures of himself, young, energetic, genuinely happy, surrounded by teams of engineers celebrating breakthrough moments. Newsletter articles about company-sponsored education programs, environmental initiatives, and community outreach projects that had been quietly cancelled over the past 5 years. In one photograph, taken at the 1998 Christmas party, Victor saw himself with his arm around a much younger Matthew Crane. Matthew was holding an award for Ethical Leadership in Technology Development, an award Victor had personally created to recognize employees who prioritized social responsibility alongside profit. The irony was devastating. But as Victor sat surrounded by these ghosts of better times, he realized something crucial. The values he tried to instill weren't completely finished. They lived on in people like Marcus, Elena, Sarah, and Tom. Employees who still believed that technology could be a force for good, that companies could care about more than quarterly earnings, that work could be meaningful beyond just paying bills. Matthew had been wrong about one thing. Victor's legacy wasn't just intellectual property and market share. It was the human spirit that still flickered in the employees who refused to give up on doing the right thing, even when everything around them incentivized cynicism. Victor carefully photographed the most damning financial documents with his phone, uploaded encrypted copies to secure cloud storage, and began organizing his evidence into a presentation that would expose not just the fraud, but the systematic betrayal of everything Langley Industries had once stood for. The 50th anniversary board meeting was just 6 weeks away. Matthew thought he was planning his final triumph. He had no idea he was walking into his own reckoning. The Langley Industries 50th anniversary celebration was everything Matthew Crane had envisioned, a carefully orchestrated spectacle designed to showcase the company's evolution under his leadership. The grand ballroom of the Seattle Convention Center buzzed with 300 invited guests, major investors, board members, key clients, and select employees who'd been deemed representative of company values. Local news cameras captured every moment for the live broadcast, part of Matthew's strategy to generate positive publicity before the Shanghai Meridian acquisition announcement. He'd even commissioned a documentary crew to create a legacy film about the company's transformation from founder-driven idealism to market-focused pragmatism. Victor watched it all unfold from his position in the AV control booth, wearing his Vincent Lake disguise one final time. His IT credentials had gotten him assigned to the technical support team, responsible for managing the presentation equipment and live stream. It was the perfect vantage point for what he had planned. On stage, Matthew commanded the podium with practiced confidence, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile camera ready. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the company's stock performance over the past decade, an impressive upward trajectory that conveniently omitted the human cost of achieving those numbers. 50 years ago, Matthew began, his voice carrying easily through the sound system Victor was monitoring. Victor Langley founded this company with a simple dream: to harness technology for business advancement. Today, we've transformed that dream into measurable reality. The audience applauded politely. Victor noticed how few actual employees were present, mostly upper management and department heads who'd survived the recent efficiency initiatives. The people he'd befriended over the past 2 months, Marcus, Elena, Sarah, Tom, were notably absent from the celebration of their own company's anniversary. Under my leadership as CEO, Matthew continued, we've streamlined operations, maximized shareholder value, and positioned Langley Industries for unprecedented growth opportunities. Our recent partnership discussions with international investors demonstrate the global confidence in our strategic direction. Partnership discussions. Victor's jaw clenched. Even now, Matthew couldn't bring himself to use the word sale. The presentation continued with slick graphics and cherry-picked testimonials. Matthew spoke about innovative cost management and optimized workforce allocation, as if mass layoffs were technological breakthroughs. He praised the company's agile adaptation to market demands, while completely ignoring the abandonment of research and development that had once been their competitive advantage. Victor checked his watch, 7:43 p.m. In exactly 2 minutes, according to the schedule he'd helped prepare, Matthew would open the floor for a special retrospective presentation before the closing remarks. That was Victor's window. As Matthew transitioned to his scripted segment about honoring our founder's legacy, Victor quietly slipped out of the control booth and made his way toward the stage. His heart hammered against his ribs, not from his old cardiac issues, but from pure adrenaline. Victor Langley's vision, Matthew was saying, laid the foundation for what we've built today. Though health concerns forced his early retirement, his entrepreneurial spirit lives on in our commitment to profitable innovation. Profitable innovation. The phrase made Victor's skin crawl. Security personnel recognized Vincent Lake's IT badge and waved him through the backstage area without question. Victor had spent weeks establishing his reputation as the harmless technician who fixed things quietly and efficiently. Now that reputation was his key to the stage. As we look toward the future, Matthew continued, we remain dedicated to the principles that have always driven this company: excellence, efficiency, and results that matter to our stakeholders. Victor stepped into the wings, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. On the screens throughout the ballroom, he could see his own face from 30 years ago, archived footage from the company's early days, when he'd stood at similar podiums talking about changing the world through technology. The irony was perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew announced, I'd like to present a special tribute to our founder, featuring rare footage and insights into the visionary leadership that started it all. The lights dimmed for the video presentation. This was Victor's moment. He walked onto the darkened stage, his footsteps silent on the carpeted platform. As the tribute video began playing, images of young Victor surrounded by the original team of engineers, Victor positioned himself just behind and to the left of Matthew's podium. When the video reached its crescendo, a clip of Victor's final public speech about building technology that serves humanity, Victor stepped into the spotlight. The effect was electric. Gasps rippled through the audience as 300 people tried to process what they were seeing. The man on the screen looked remarkably similar to the elderly figure now standing on stage, but that was impossible. Victor Langley was retired, reclusive, practically a hermit in Montana. Matthew turned to see what had captured the audience's attention. When his eyes met Victor's, his face went white. "Hello, Matthew," Victor said, his voice carrying clearly through the wireless microphone he'd discreetly activated backstage. "Enjoying the tribute?" The ballroom erupted in confused murmurs. Cameras swung toward the stage, broadcasting the moment live to thousands of viewers. Board members leaned forward in their seats, squinting as if they couldn't trust their own eyes. Victor reached up and removed the thick glasses, then pulled off the gray wig that had hidden his distinctive hairline. Without the prosthetic padding and careful posturing, his true identity became unmistakable. "For those who don't recognize me," he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "I'm Victor Langley, founder and majority shareholder of Langley Industries. And I've spent the past 2 months working undercover in my own company, documenting exactly what you've done to it." Matthew's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Patricia Wells, visible in the front row, looked like she was about to be sick. "You thought I was safely tucked away in Montana, didn't you?" Victor's tone was conversational, almost friendly. "Too sick and senile to notice my life's work being dismantled for spare parts. Too trusting to investigate the rumors about layoffs and financial irregularities." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive, holding it up for the cameras to capture clearly. "This contains 3 years of communications between my executive team and Shanghai Meridian Industries. Detailed plans to sell this company for $38 billion while laying off 85% of our workforce. Financial records showing systematic asset stripping, patent theft, and fraud totaling over $200 million. The audience was dead silent now. Victor could see reporters frantically taking notes, board members reaching for their phones, investors calculating the implications of what they were hearing. "But the real crime," Victor continued, his voice carrying the weight of profound betrayal, "isn't the money you've stolen. It's the systematic destruction of a culture that took 30 years to build. You've turned engineers into cost centers, innovation into inefficiency, and human dignity into a line item to be optimized away." Matthew finally found his voice. "Victor, you don't understand the pressures of modern business." "I understand perfectly." Victor cut him off. "You've confused ruthlessness with leadership, greed with strategy, and betrayal with business evolution. You've taken 3,000 families' livelihoods and turned them into your retirement fund." Victor looked directly into the nearest camera, speaking now to the employees watching at home, the customers who'd trusted the company, the investors who'd been deceived. "This is not what Langley Industries was meant to become. This is not the legacy I intended to leave. But it's not too late to rebuild something worthy of the people who still believe in doing the right thing." He turned back to Matthew, whose composed facade had completely crumbled. "Security will escort you from the building. Your access is revoked, your accounts are frozen, and federal investigators will be very interested in reviewing your offshore banking arrangements." As if summoned by his words, FBI agents began filing into the ballroom. Victor had timed this revelation perfectly. His evidence had been delivered to federal prosecutors that afternoon, giving them just enough time to obtain warrants and coordinate with local law enforcement. The 50th anniversary celebration had become a very different kind of milestone, the day Langley Industries was reborn from the ashes of corporate betrayal. But as Victor watched Matthew being led away in handcuffs, he knew the hardest work was just beginning. The Monday morning after the anniversary debacle, Victor stood in his old office for the first time in a decade, staring at a company in free fall. The executive suite had been stripped of Matthew's personal touches. Gone were the expensive art pieces and the wall of awards celebrating operational excellence. What remained was a sterile space that felt as hollow as the company itself. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Victor could see news vans still camped outside the building, their satellite dishes reaching toward a gray Seattle sky that seemed to mirror the company's prospects. The numbers were devastating. Stock price had plummeted 43% in pre-market trading. 3 major clients had already announced they were reviewing their vendor relationships. The SEC had frozen all executive compensation pending investigation. And most critically, employee morale had somehow managed to sink even lower than it had been under Matthew's leadership. Mr. Langley? His assistant, a nervous young woman named Jennifer who'd been hired during Matthew's tenure, peered around the doorframe. The emergency board meeting is ready to begin. Victor straightened his tie, the same conservative navy blue he'd worn as Vincent Lake, but somehow feeling heavier now that everyone knew who he really was. Send them in. The remaining board members filed in like mourners at a funeral, which, in many ways, they were. These were investors and business leaders who trusted Matthew's vision of profitable transformation. Now they faced potential criminal liability for failing to oversee the systematic looting of shareholder assets. Victor, began Helen Morrison, the board's longest-serving independent member. We need to discuss immediate damage control. The FBI raids, the media coverage, the client defections. We're looking at potential bankruptcy within 6 months if we don't act decisively. What do you propose? Victor asked, settling into the chair he'd vacated 10 years earlier. Full management restructuring. Bring in a crisis management firm, hire a proven turnaround CEO, implement immediate cost controls. More layoffs, you mean? Helen's expression tightened. Victor, I understand your attachment to the company culture, but we're in survival mode. Sentiment won't save jobs if there's no company left to employ people. For 2 hours, they debated strategies that all sounded eerily familiar: efficiency improvements, operational streamlining, strategic downsizing. The same corporate speak that had justified Matthew's destructive policies, now repackaged as salvation. Victor listened to their proposals with growing frustration. These people, well-meaning though they might be, saw the company as a collection of assets to be optimized rather than a community to be rebuilt. They understood balance sheets but not the human dynamics that had made Langley Industries special in the first place. I need some time to consider our options, Victor finally said. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning. After the board members filed out, Victor sat alone in the office, feeling the weight of 3,000 employees' futures pressing down on him. Through the window, he could see workers arriving for their shifts, their faces carrying a mixture of curiosity, fear, and resignation that broke his heart. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Come in. To his surprise, Elena Rodriguez entered, still wearing her facilities uniform but carrying herself with a dignity that commanded attention. Mr. Langley, I mean Mr. Lake, I mean. She paused, clearly flustered by the identity revelation. Victor is fine, he said gently. What can I do for you? Actually, sir, I was hoping I could do something for you. For the company. Elena straightened her shoulders. I've been talking with some of the other employees, Marcus from IT, Sarah from customer service, Tom from programming. We have some ideas. Over the next hour, Elena laid out a vision that was both pragmatic and revolutionary. Instead of top-down restructuring, what if they rebuilt from the ground up? What if the people who actually did the work, who understood the company's real strengths and genuine problems, had a say in designing the recovery? The thing is, Elena explained, we know where the inefficiencies actually are. Not the fake ones Matthew's team created to justify their schemes, but the real operational problems that have been ignored for years. We know which client relationships are worth saving and which vendors are overcharging us. We know which projects have genuine potential and which are just resume padding for managers who've already been fired. Victor felt something stirring that he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. What exactly are you proposing? Worker advisory councils for each major department. Real decision-making authority, not just suggestion boxes. Let the people who know the work redesign the workflows. Let customer service help shape product development. Let facilities optimize space utilization instead of just implementing orders from executives who've never actually walked the production floor. It was radical. It was unprecedented in corporate America. It was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that had built Langley Industries in the first place. Elena, Victor said slowly, how would you like to be our new director of organizational development? 3 weeks later, the company looked like a construction site. Not because of physical renovations, but because every department was simultaneously deconstructing broken processes and rebuilding them from scratch. Marcus Williams found himself leading a cross-functional team developing the carbon tracking application he'd proposed months earlier, but now with input from customer service about client needs, facilities about implementation challenges, and finance about sustainable pricing models. Sarah Chin was spearheading a client retention program that addressed actual service complaints rather than metrics-driven talking points. Her team's direct outreach had already convinced 2 major clients to postpone their vendor reviews. Tom Anderson had been put in charge of technical infrastructure, tasked with rebuilding systems that had been neglected in favor of cost-cutting measures. His first recommendation was to restore the innovation lab that had been converted into a productivity center. The changes weren't universally popular. Several middle managers resigned rather than adapt to collaborative decision-making. Some longtime employees struggled with increased responsibility and accountability. The financial press criticized Victor's socialism experiment and predicted continued stock decline. But something was shifting in the hallways of Langley Industries. Conversations were happening. Real discussions about problems and solutions rather than careful navigation around corporate drama. The break rooms buzzed with project planning instead of resignation complaints. People stayed late not because they were required to, but because they were excited about what they were building. Victor instituted weekly founders' walks, informal tours through different departments where he could see the changes firsthand and hear directly from employees about what was working and what wasn't. It reminded him of the early days, when the company had been small enough for him to know everyone's name and ambitious enough to believe they could change the world. The financial turnaround would take time, possibly years. The legal investigations would drag on for months. Some of the damage Matthew had done might be irreversible. But as Victor watched Elena facilitate a planning session between engineering and customer service, as he saw Marcus presenting his environmental application to actual potential clients, as he observed the cautious optimism returning to faces that had been marked by cynicism just weeks earlier, he realized something crucial. They weren't just rebuilding a company. They were proving that businesses could be both profitable and purposeful, both efficient and humane. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a decade, it felt possible. The ghost had returned to the machine, but this time, he wasn't haunting it, he was helping to bring it back to life. 8 months later, Victor stood in the lobby of Langley Industries for what he knew would be the last time as its leader, watching the morning rush of employees whose faces no longer carried the weight of dread he'd witnessed during his undercover investigation. The building itself looked different. Gone were the sterile marble surfaces and corporate motivational displays. In their place, the lobby showcased a living timeline of company innovations, not just products and patents, but photographs of the teams who'd created them, testimonials from customers whose lives had been improved, and updates on ongoing projects that prioritize social impact alongside profit margins. The centerpiece was a restored version of the original company museum, curated by Elena Rodriguez and her team. It told the honest story of Langley Industries, the idealistic beginning, the corporate corruption, and the ongoing effort to rebuild something worthy of the people who made it run. Pretty amazing what 8 months can accomplish, said Marcus Williams, approaching with the easy confidence of someone who'd found his place in the world. As the new director of sustainable innovation, he'd overseen the launch of 3 environmentally focused applications that were already generating both revenue and industry recognition. You did this, Victor replied, gesturing toward the bustling lobby where employees from different departments clustered together, collaborating rather than competing. All of you? It was true. The company was smaller now, roughly half its previous size, but every person remaining had chosen to stay, had fought for the transformation, had proven that business could be both profitable and principled. The layoffs that had occurred were voluntary buyouts and early retirements, not the brutal efficiency cuts that Matthew had planned. The financial recovery had been slower than traditional investors wanted but faster than anyone had dared hope. 3 major clients had not only renewed their contracts but expanded them, specifically citing the company's renewed commitment to innovation and customer service. 2 competitors had reached out about potential partnerships, intrigued by Langley's experimental management structure. Most importantly, they were profitable again, not through cost-cutting and asset stripping, but through genuine value creation. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, Elena reminded him, joining their conversation. She'd grown into her leadership role with remarkable skill, becoming the bridge between Victor's vision and the practical realities of day-to-day operations. Victor nodded but didn't move toward the elevators. Today's board meeting would formalize his second retirement, this time by his own choice rather than medical necessity. The transition plan had been months in the making, a unique governance structure that balanced shareholder interests with employee representation and community impact. Elena would become CEO, with Marcus as her deputy. Sarah Chin had been promoted to Customer Relations Director, while Tom Anderson led the newly expanded Research and Development Division. The board itself had been restructured to include employee representatives and community leaders alongside traditional investors. It was unprecedented in corporate America, but it was working. "Victor," Elena said softly, "are you sure about this? The company needs you." "No," he replied with surprising certainty. The company needed Vincent Lake, the invisible technician who could see problems that leadership ignored. But Victor Langley, the founder? He's served his purpose. You don't need a figurehead or a symbol. You need leaders who understand that businesses exist to serve people, not the other way around. The board meeting was ceremonial rather than contentious. The transition documents were signed, the new governance structure was officially ratified, and Victor's majority stake was transferred to an employee community trust that would ensure the company's values couldn't be sold off to the highest bidder. When it was over, Victor cleaned out his office, not much to pack, since he'd never really moved back in, and walked slowly through the building one final time. The engineering floor hummed with productive energy. The customer service department had expanded into a genuine customer advocacy center. The break rooms buzzed with project discussions and collaborative planning. Even the executive suite had been repurposed, with walls removed to create open collaboration spaces. As he made his way toward the lobby, Victor detoured past the break room on the 15th floor, the same one where he'd hidden as Vincent Lake, overhearing the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed everything he'd built. The door was open, and voices carried into the hallway. Victor paused, not to eavesdrop this time, but simply to listen to the tone of the conversation. "Told the client we could have the accessibility features ready by next month, but only if it actually improves the user experience," Sarah was saying. "No point in checking boxes just to check boxes." "Exactly," came Marcus's voice. "The carbon tracking integration is the same way. We could rush it to market in 6 weeks, but it won't actually help small businesses reduce their environmental impact unless we get the user interface right. Better to take the time and build something meaningful," Elena added. "Mr. Langley always said that innovation isn't about being first to market, it's about being first to matter." Victor smiled at hearing his own words, spoken not as corporate orthodoxy but as living principle that guided real decisions. "Speaking of which," Tom's voice joined the conversation. "I've got 3 junior developers working on that educational software for underserved schools. No revenue potential, but the impact could be huge. Elena, you okay with dedicating resources to something that won't show up on quarterly reports?" "Are you kidding?" Elena laughed, a sound of genuine joy that Victor had never heard during his undercover months. "That's exactly the kind of project that makes people proud to work here. Besides, you never know where breakthrough innovations come from. Some of our best commercial applications started as passion projects. Victor continued toward the lobby, their voices fading behind him but their spirit lingering in his heart. This was what he'd always envisioned, a workplace where profit and purpose weren't competing priorities but complementary goals, where innovation emerged from genuine desire to solve meaningful problems, where employees felt valued not as human resources but as human beings. As he stepped through the front doors of Langley Industries, Victor Langley the owner was walking away forever. But Victor Langley, the man who'd stood up for what mattered, who'd proven that businesses could be forces for good in the world, was finally at peace. Behind him, the building thrived with the sound of shared purpose, genuine laughter, and hope for a future worth building. The ghost had found its rest, and the machine hummed with authentic life.